She moved between the beds with quiet steps, mop in hand, her name tag smudged, unnoticed. Doctors passed her. Patients ignored her. But the retired general in room 12 hadn't forgotten those eyes. He sat up slowly, reached for his cane, and as she turned to leave, he stood, placed his trembling hand on his cap, and saluted. The ward fell silent, because they all realized she wasn't just the janitor. She had once pulled soldiers from fire, including him. From which corner of the world are you witnessing this story today? If you believe that true heroes often work in the shadows, consider subscribing for more stories that reveal the extraordinary courage hidden within ordinary moments. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of St. Catherine's Veterans Medical Center as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the polished corridor. At 5:47 a.m., the hospital hummed with quiet efficiency. Nurses completing night rounds, orderlies preparing breakfast trays, and the constant electronic symphony of monitors tracking vital signs. Maria had walked these halls for 11 years, her gray uniform and worn sneakers marking her as part of the invisible workforce that kept the facility running. She paused outside room 312, checking the clipboard that held her daily assignments. A new patient had arrived during the night shift. General Morrison, 73, admitted for complications related to old war injuries. Maria knocked softly before entering, announcing her presence with the practiced courtesy she extended to every patient, though few ever acknowledged it. "Housekeeping," she said quietly, noticing the man was awake, staring at the ceiling with unfocused eyes. The morning light filtering through the blinds revealed a face marked by age but still carrying the rigid posture that spoke of military service. His hands, resting on the white hospital blanket, bore scars that suggested a life of action rather than comfort. General Theodore Morrison, though his civilian clothes bore no indication of rank, turned his head toward the voice. Something flickered in his weathered features as he studied the small woman who had entered his room. She moved with an economy of motion that seemed familiar, purposeful in a way that transcended her mundane task. "Don't mind me, sir," Maria continued, beginning her routine of emptying wastebaskets and sanitizing surfaces. Her voice carried a slight accent that traced back to El Salvador, where she'd spent the first 16 years of her life before her family immigrated to California. "I'll be finished quickly." Morrison watched her work, his trained eyes noting details that civilian observers would miss. Her posture was too straight for someone who spent days bent over cleaning equipment. When she turned to wipe down his bedside table, she maintained visual contact with both the door and the window, situational awareness that spoke of training most hospital custodians never received. "How long have you worked here?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying the gravelly authority of someone accustomed to command. Maria glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly. 11 years this December, sir." She moved toward the small bathroom, her cart wheels squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. Something in his intense gaze made her uncomfortable, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle she didn't realize she represented. "You remind me of someone," Morrison said, more to himself than to her. He shifted in the hospital bed, wincing as movement aggravated the shrapnel fragments still embedded near his spine, souvenirs from a roadside bomb in Afghanistan that had changed the trajectory of his military career. Maria emerged from the bathroom, pushing her cart toward the door. "You rest now, sir. The nurses will bring your morning medications soon." She paused at the threshold, something in his voice making her look back. For a moment, their eyes met across the sterile hospital room, and Morrison felt a jolt of recognition so strong it made his chest tighten. "Wait," he called, but she had already moved into the hallway, leaving him alone with a growing certainty that he knew that face from somewhere far removed from these institutional walls. 3 doors down, Dr. Patricia Reeves was conducting morning rounds with her team of residents. Their discussion centered on treatment protocols and discharge planning, the routine medical conversations that filled hospital corridors each day. None of them paid attention to the quiet woman mopping floors nearby. She had become as invisible as the medical equipment and institutional furniture that surrounded them. "Patient in 312 is presenting with increased inflammation around the retained shrapnel," Dr. Reeves explained to her eager students. "We'll need to monitor for infection and adjust his pain management. This is common with veterans who have foreign objects from combat injuries. The body never fully adapts. Maria continued her methodical work, moving through the ward with the practiced invisibility she'd perfected over 11 years. She developed an almost supernatural ability to blend into the background while maintaining awareness of everything happening around her. Conversations between medical staff, worried phone calls from family members, the subtle changes in patient behavior that often preceded medical crises. In room 315, she checked on Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman whose son was deployed in Syria. The woman often couldn't sleep, haunted by news reports and the silence between phone calls from her boy stationed at a forward operating base near Damascus. 3 weeks since I heard his voice, Mrs. Chun whispered as Maria dusted the windowsill. Last time he called, he said they were moving somewhere more dangerous. You have children? No, ma'am, Maria replied softly, though her words carried an understanding that seemed to comfort the older woman. But soldiers are well trained. They look after each other over there. What Mrs. Chin didn't know was that Maria spoke from experience that went far beyond civilian sympathy. She'd been in those forward operating bases, had seen how soldiers protected each other when everything went wrong, had participated in that brotherhood of survival that civilians could never fully comprehend. 2 hours into her shift, Maria was restocking supplies when she overheard nurses at the central station discussing the new patient in room 312. They were reviewing his intake paperwork and medical history, sharing information with the casual professionalism that characterized hospital staff. Retired Brigadier General Morrison, Nurse Patterson was saying as she updated electronic records. 31 years of service, multiple deployments. Medical notes indicate he was involved in a significant combat incident in 2008. Lost several members of his unit in an ambush situation. These older vets carry so much trauma, replied Nurse Williams, herself a Navy veteran who often worked with military patients. The physical wounds heal, but the psychological scars run deeper. This patient specifically requested to speak with any staff members who might have military experience. Maria paused in her restocking routine. Afghanistan, 2008. Combat incident with casualties. The details triggered a cascade of memories she'd spent years learning to suppress. The heat of desert air, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors, radio chatter filled with coordinates and casualty reports, the metallic taste of adrenaline that accompanied every mission into hostile territory. She forced herself back to the present, focusing on the mundane task of counting towels and replacing soap dispensers. Those days were behind her, buried beneath 11 years of quiet service and deliberate anonymity. She'd build a new life in these sterile corridors, finding purpose in caring for those who needed healing, even if that care came through clean floors and sanitized surfaces rather than emergency medical intervention under enemy fire. But as she passed room 312 again, she couldn't help glancing inside at the man lying there. Beneath the gray hair and the lines carved by decades of military service, she caught a glimpse of a younger soldier who had once looked up at her from a stretcher in the back of a medical evacuation helicopter. By mid-morning, the ward had settled into its daily rhythm. Physical therapy sessions, family visits, the endless cycle of medical assessments that marked progress toward recovery. Maria had finished her assigned areas and was preparing to move to the next floor when her supervisor approached with additional instructions. Maria, I need you to spend extra time in the Veterans Wing today, said Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, the environmental services coordinator who managed housekeeping with military precision. We have some distinguished visitors coming this afternoon, and administration wants everything perfect. Of course, Maria replied, grateful for any excuse to remain in the section where she felt most useful. Over the years, she developed an unofficial specialization in caring for veteran patients, though her supervisors attributed her effectiveness to nothing more than diligence and cultural sensitivity. As she returned to the Veterans Wing, Maria noticed increased activity around room 312. Dr. Reeves was consulting with a pain management specialist, their voices low but urgent as they discussed treatment options for General Morrison's condition. Through the partially open door, she could see Morrison himself, now sitting up and speaking intensely into his cell phone. I'm telling you, Michael, I recognize that face, Morrison was saying to someone on the other end. It's been bothering me all morning. She reminds me of someone from Afghanistan, but I can't place exactly when or where. He listened for a moment, then shook his head. No, it's not medication confusion. My memory is sharp when it comes to faces from the service. Maria found herself slowing as she passed his room, not intentionally eavesdropping, but unable to avoid hearing his frustrated tone. Many veterans experienced moments of misplaced recognition, their minds struggling to categorize familiar faces in unfamiliar contexts, creating connections that might or might not reflect reality. Listen, do me a favor, Morrison continued. Contact Colonel Sanders at the Pentagon Archives and see if he can pull my service records from 2008, specifically Operation Desert Angel. There was a helicopter rescue that. Just see what he can find. He ended the call and leaned back against his pillows, his eyes still holding that distant look of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Maria quickened her pace, pushing her cart toward the supply closet as her heart rate accelerated in a way it hadn't in years. Operation Desert Angel. September 23, 2008. The mission that had ended her military career and changed the trajectory of her life in ways she was still discovering 11 years later. The afternoon brought a stream of visitors, family members carrying flowers and get-well cards, fellow veterans sharing war stories and updates from the outside world. Maria worked around them with her characteristic invisibility, but her mind remained fixed on Morrison's phone conversation and its implications. In room 318, she listened as a young veteran described his nightmares to his wife, his voice barely audible as he recounted dreams filled with mortar fire and wounded comrades. Maria wanted to offer comfort from her own experience, but her role required her to remain background scenery, providing care through cleanliness rather than conversation. The dreams are getting worse, the young man was saying, his hands trembling as he reached for his water cup. Every night, it's the same. I'm back there, hearing them call for help, but I can't move. I can't save them. Maria had heard similar confessions hundreds of times over her years at the hospital. She'd learned to recognize the signs of combat trauma, the way certain patients held themselves when they thought no one was watching. What she couldn't share was her intimate understanding of those nightmares, the way specific sounds could transport her back to mountainous terrain half a world away, where life and death decisions were measured in seconds. As evening approached and the day shift prepared to transfer responsibilities to the night crew, Maria made her final rounds through the veterans' wing. Most patients were settling in, their rooms darkened except for the soft glow of medical monitors and hallway illumination filtering through doorways. She was completing her tasks in room 316 when she heard her name called from across the hall. General Morrison was sitting upright in bed, his bedside lamp casting warm light across his weathered features. Something in his posture had changed since morning. There was an alertness there, a focus that suggested he'd found at least some of the missing pieces to his puzzle. Could you step in here for a moment? Morrison asked, his voice carrying the respectful authority that marked career military officers. Maria glanced around to ensure no supervisors were nearby who might question her spending time in conversation with a patient, then moved her cart closer to his doorway. Yes, sir, she said, maintaining professional distance while acknowledging his obvious military background. Morrison studied her face with the intensity of someone conducting a formal identification. I made some calls today, he said slowly, reaching for a folder on his bedside table. Had my son contact the military archives. Turns out my memory wasn't playing tricks after all. Maria felt her breath catch, but maintained the composed expression she'd perfected over years of remaining unnoticed in institutional settings. Operation Desert Angel, September 23, 2008. Morrison continued, his voice taking on the formal cadence of someone delivering an official report. My convoy was ambushed 40 kilometers northwest of Kandahar. IED followed by coordinated small arms fire. We took heavy casualties and were pinned down in hostile territory with no immediate extraction available. The details hit Maria like physical blows, each one triggering vivid sensory memories. The acrid smell of burning vehicles, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors cutting through thin mountain air, radio chatter filled with urgent coordinates and medical status reports. What saved us that day? Morrison continued, opening his folder to consult what appeared to be official documentation, was a combat search and rescue pilot who violated direct orders to enter a hot landing zone. The helicopter took sustained fire during the extraction, but the crew managed to evacuate 8 wounded soldiers. The general looked up from his papers, his eyes locking with Maria's across the small hospital room. The pilot's name was Captain Maria Elena Santos, United States Air Force. According to these records, she was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that day, though the ceremony was classified due to operational security. The silence stretched between them, heavy with recognition and years of unspoken truth. Maria stood motionless, her hands gripping the handle of her cleaning cart, as 11 years of carefully constructed invisibility began to dissolve. "Captain Santos," Morrison said softly, using her former rank with the same respect he would show a current military officer. "I've been looking for you for 15 years. The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of gratitude that had been waiting more than a decade to be expressed. Maria remained silent, her mind racing through possible responses and their implications. Acknowledging her identity would fundamentally alter every relationship she'd built in this hospital, replacing the protective anonymity that had allowed her to heal while serving others. "Why are you here?" Morrison asked, his voice gentle but persistent. "Why are you working as a janitor when you're one of the most decorated rescue pilots in Air Force history?" Before Maria could respond, footsteps in the hallway indicated the approach of the evening medical team. Dr. Reeves was making final rounds with the night's supervisor, their conversation focused on patient medications and overnight care protocols. Maria stepped back from Morrison's doorway, resuming her cleaning routine as they passed. "We'll monitor his pain levels overnight," Dr. Reeves was saying. "The inflammation around those old shrapnel fragments is responding to treatment, but he's been agitated all day." "Has he had many visitors?" "Several phone calls to military contacts," the night's supervisor replied, consulting her notes. "He seems to be researching something related to his service record. Nothing unusual for veterans trying to process old memories." As the medical team entered Morrison's room for their evening assessment, Maria quietly pushed her cart toward the elevators. Her shift was officially over, but sleep would be impossible with Morrison's recognition echoing in her mind, bringing with it memories and emotions she'd spent years learning to manage. The next morning arrived with autumn rain drumming against hospital windows, casting everything in gray light that matched Maria's uncertain mood. She'd spent the night wrestling with the implications of Morrison's discovery, knowing that their conversation had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She began her rounds with mechanical precision, moving through her assigned areas while hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation that might indicate Morrison had shared his discovery. The possibility of exposure created anxiety she hadn't felt since her early days at the hospital, when nightmares still woke her and unexpected sounds could trigger combat reflexes. Room 312 was quiet as she approached. Morrison appeared to be sleeping, though something in his posture suggested awareness of her presence. Maria knocked softly and entered, immediately noting that the military documents were no longer visible on his bedside table. "Captain Santos," Morrison said quietly without opening his eyes, using her former rank in a voice that carried 15 years of accumulated gratitude. "I was hoping you'd come back." "It's just Maria now, sir," she replied, beginning her cleaning routine while keeping her voice low. "Has been for 11 years. Morrison opened his eyes and studied her face. "I need you to understand something. I haven't told anyone about our conversation yesterday. Not my son, not the medical staff, not even my wife." He shifted carefully to sit up. "But I also need to understand why someone with your background is working in environmental services." Maria paused in wiping down his bedside table, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time in 11 years that she'd allowed herself to be truly seen by someone who knew her history. "Because sometimes the best way to serve is to disappear. Because some wounds heal better in silence." Morrison nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. He'd commanded enough soldiers dealing with combat trauma to recognize the various ways people found to cope with experiences that existed outside normal human endurance. "PTSD?" he asked gently. "Among other complications," Maria confirmed. "The Air Force wanted me to take a staff position after Afghanistan. Said I'd done enough frontline duty. But sitting behind a desk felt like dying slowly, so I requested discharge." She resumed cleaning, using familiar motions to ground herself. "Found this job through a veterans placement program. discovered that caring for people, even in small ways, helped with the adjustment. And no one knows? Morrison asked, his voice mixing amazement with respect. In 11 years, nobody has recognized you. You're the first, Maria admitted. Most people see what they expect. A middle-aged Latina woman in a cleaning uniform becomes invisible in institutions like this. It's camouflage that works better than anything the military issued. Morrison was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, he spoke with the measured tone of command decision. What you did that day, Captain Santos, Maria, didn't just save our lives. You saved our families, our futures, everything we became afterward. My grandson starts college next month. My daughter-in-law just had her second baby. My wife got to watch me walk her down the aisle instead of accepting a folded flag at my funeral. You were good soldiers doing your duty, Maria replied. I was doing mine. No, Morrison said firmly. What you did went beyond duty. You violated direct orders, risked court-martial, put your aircraft and crew in extreme danger to save 8 soldiers who weren't even your responsibility. Maria finished her cleaning and moved toward the door, but Morrison's words made her pause. General, sometimes the most important service happens when no one's watching. Sometimes recognition destroys the very thing it's meant to honor. Before Morrison could respond, voices in the hallway announced the beginning of morning medical rounds. Maria stepped into the corridor, resuming her invisible role, but Morrison's gratitude followed her as she continued through the ward. Throughout the morning, Maria found herself hyper-aware of Morrison's presence even while working in other rooms. She could hear him making phone calls, his voice animated as he spoke with family members about his improved condition and discharge planning. Occasionally, she caught fragments suggesting he was still processing their conversation and its implications. In room 320, she listened as Mrs. Patterson received good news. Her nephew's unit was rotating home from deployment 3 months early. The relief in the elderly woman's voice was palpable as she shared this development with Maria, who had become a confidential audience for her fears and hopes. I knew he'd be safe, Mrs. Patterson said through tears of relief. I just felt like guardian angels were watching over him. Isn't it amazing how sometimes people we never know are looking out for the ones we love? Maria nodded, understanding the irony. How many families over the years had been grateful for the safe return of soldiers without ever knowing the names or faces of those who'd risked everything to make homecomings possible? As afternoon approached, Maria was completing her assigned areas when she was summoned to the administrative office. Her supervisor was waiting with paperwork and an expression suggesting either opportunity or complication. Maria, we've received an unusual request, Mrs. Rodriguez began, consulting her clipboard. The patient in 312 has specifically asked that you be assigned as his primary environmental services technician for the remainder of his stay. It's uncommon, but he's a distinguished veteran, and administration has agreed. Maria felt apprehension mixed with resignation. Morrison had found a way to extend their interaction without violating her privacy or revealing her identity. It was diplomatic but also represented a crack in the protective anonymity she'd maintained for over a decade. How long is his expected stay? Maria asked. 3 to 4 days, depending on his response to treatment, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. His condition is improving, but they want to monitor for complications before discharge. When Maria returned to room 312 for what would now be extended duty, she found Morrison reading what appeared to be a leather journal. He looked up as she entered, his expression combining warmth with something like anticipation. Thank you for accepting the assignment, Morrison said, setting aside his journal. I hope it doesn't complicate your other responsibilities. It's fine, General, Maria replied, beginning her routine. Though I'm curious about your reasoning. Morrison smiled, the first genuine expression of humor she'd seen from him. 15 years of questions, Captain. 15 years of wondering what happened to the pilot who saved my life. Now that I've found you, I'm not ready to let you disappear again. I'm not disappearing, Maria said quietly. I'm right here, doing work that needs doing, caring for people who deserve care. But invisible, Morrison pointed out. Hidden. While I respect your choice to serve quietly, I think you underestimate the impact that recognition could have, not just for you, but for others who need examples of different kinds of courage. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Reeves, who entered for her afternoon assessment with cheerful greetings for both patient and the cleaning staff member she'd noticed spending more time in this room lately. Your lab results show significant improvement, Dr. Reeves reported, checking Morrison's chart. If this trend continues, we'll be able to discharge you tomorrow. Your family must be relieved. They are, Morrison confirmed, though his attention remained on Maria as she worked around the medical consultation. Though I'll miss some aspects of my stay here, the care has been exceptional. After Dr. Reeves left, Morrison and Maria found themselves alone in the quiet afternoon atmosphere of the hospital room. Sunlight streamed through the window, creating warmth that felt removed from the institutional routine. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, Morrison began, about service being more valuable when it's invisible. While I understand that philosophy, I also think about all the young veterans who pass through these halls, people struggling with identity, trying to find purpose after military service. Maria set down her cleaning supplies and looked at him directly. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe your story could provide hope to people who need to see that service takes many forms. That transition doesn't have to mean the end of meaningful contribution. Morrison leaned forward slightly. I'm suggesting it might be time to let yourself be seen. The weight of his words settled over the room. Maria had spent 11 years perfecting invisibility, finding peace in anonymity and purpose in quiet care. The idea of stepping back into recognition felt simultaneously terrifying and oddly liberating. And if I refuse? Maria asked. If I choose to continue as I am, then I'll respect that decision completely. Morrison replied without hesitation. Your current service isn't diminished by the choice to remain private. But I had to ask, because I've spent 15 years wanting to properly thank the person who gave me a future. As evening descended over the hospital, Maria completed her extended duties in Morrison's room, their conversations creating new understanding between them. Tomorrow would bring his discharge and potentially the end of their reconnection, unless she chose to make different decisions about visibility and recognition. The morning of Morrison's discharge brought unusual activity throughout the veteran's wing. His family had arrived early to handle paperwork and coordinate his return home, their voices carrying the mixture of relief and celebration that marked successful medical treatment. Maria found Morrison already dressed in civilian clothes, his military bearing evident even in casual attire. His adult son was organizing personal belongings while engaging in animated phone conversation with what sounded like other family members eager for updates. Dad's doing better than anyone expected, his son was saying as Maria entered for final cleaning duties. The doctors say the inflammation is almost completely resolved, and his mobility is significantly improved. We should have him home by noon. As Maria worked around the discharge preparations, she noticed Morrison watching her with an expression suggesting their previous conversations remained very much on his mind. His son, noting his father's attention to the hospital staff, approached Maria with polite curiosity. I'm David Morrison, he introduced himself. Dad's mentioned how exceptional the hospital care has been, especially from environmental services. That's unusual. Most patients barely notice housekeeping staff. Your father has been a model patient, Maria replied carefully, avoiding Morrison's direct gaze. We've enjoyed having him here. David extended his hand. I don't think we've been formally introduced. Dad specifically praised your professionalism and attention to detail. Maria Santos, she replied, accepting the handshake while maintaining professional composure. There was intelligence in David's manner that suggested he'd inherited more than his father's features, an awareness that indicated he'd detected undercurrents in his father's comments about hospital staff. As discharge preparations continued, Maria found herself working more slowly than usual, perhaps unconsciously extending her time in Morrison's room. The general himself seemed in no hurry to leave, double-checking items that were already packed and engaging in extended conversations with his medical team. Finally, with all paperwork completed and belongings gathered, the moment arrived for Morrison's departure. David was waiting in the hallway with discharge transportation, though Morrison had insisted he could walk to the car independently. As the family prepared to leave, Morrison turned back toward his room where Maria was making final adjustments to the now empty space. Could I have just a moment? He asked his son, who graciously provided privacy for what appeared to be a final thank you to exceptional hospital staff. Morrison approached Maria, who was making unnecessary organizational changes to the vacant room. Captain Maria Santos, he said quietly, using her full name and rank in what felt like formal recognition. It has been an honor to serve with you, and an honor to be served by you. Maria looked up from her work, meeting his eyes directly for what would likely be their final interaction. The honor was mine, General Morrison. I want you to have something, Morrison said, reaching into his jacket and withdrawing a small wooden box. Don't open it now, but when you have privacy, I think you'll understand its significance. Before Maria could protest, Morrison had placed the box in her hands and stepped back with military precision. Thank you, Maria Santos, for 15 years ago, for this week, and for every day between that you've spent taking care of people who needed it. He turned and walked toward his waiting family, his movement steady despite recent medical procedures. As they disappeared down the corridor toward the elevators, Maria stood alone in the empty room, holding the small wooden box and feeling the weight of recognition, gratitude, and possibility. That evening, as Maria's shift ended and the hospital settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, she found herself in the small employee lounge, finally alone with Morrison's gift. The wooden box was beautifully crafted, its surface smooth from handling and its brass hinges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, she discovered items that took her breath away. A military challenge coin bearing the insignia of Morrison's unit and inscribed with the date of Operation Desert Angel. Beneath it, a folded letter in Morrison's careful handwriting and a small silver pendant, pilot's wings identical to the ones she'd earned 15 years earlier. The letter, dated that morning, read, Captain Santos, these items represent what your service meant to the 8 soldiers you saved and to the families who welcomed us home. The challenge coin belongs to you. You earned it in ways most military personnel never will. The wings belong to my daughter. She wanted to become a rescue pilot after hearing stories about the hero who saved her father. I've taken the liberty of providing your contact information to the other 7 soldiers from that day. Not obligations, just opportunities, should you choose to accept them. Your service didn't end when you left the Air Force, Maria. It just took different form. The final paragraph made her hands tremble. The veterans wing has a new patient arriving Monday. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, recently returned from her 3rd deployment. She's struggling with transition issues and specifically asked if there were any veteran staff members who might understand her situation. I mentioned that Maria Santos from Environmental Services had military experience, if she was willing to spend extra time during cleaning rounds. Morrison's gift represented more than gratitude. It was an invitation to serve in new ways, to allow her experience and understanding to become visible to those who could benefit from it. For 11 years, she'd found purpose in invisible service, healing herself through care of others while maintaining protective anonymity. But perhaps there were different forms of courage, different ways to serve that didn't require complete invisibility. The next morning, Maria arrived at the hospital with Morrison's challenge coin in her pocket and a decision forming in her mind. She approached Mrs. Rodriguez's office and knocked on the partially open door. Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand there's a new veteran patient who might benefit from additional attention during cleaning services. Could you tell me about Staff Sergeant Walsh in room 324? Her supervisor looked up with immediate interest. Maria, yes, I was hoping someone might volunteer for that assignment. The patient is having adjustment difficulties, and the medical staff thinks contact with other veterans might help. Are you willing? I'll start this morning, Maria replied, feeling something shift in her chest. A loosening of tight control she'd maintained for over a decade, recognition that healing could take many forms and sometimes required allowing yourself to be seen. An hour later, Maria stood outside room 324 with her cleaning card, Morrison's challenge coin warm in her pocket and his words echoing in her mind. She knocked softly and entered to find a young woman staring out the window with the distant expression she recognized in too many veteran faces. Good morning, Sergeant Walsh, Maria said, her voice carrying a different quality than her usual professional courtesy. I'm Maria Santos, Environmental Services. I'm also a veteran. I heard you might appreciate having someone to talk with who understands. Walsh turned from the window, hope flickering in eyes marked by experiences that aged souls beyond their years. You served? Afghanistan, 2008, Maria replied simply. Combat search and rescue. I know something about coming home when others don't. and finding new ways to serve. As she began her cleaning routine, Walsh started talking, hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness as she realized she was speaking with someone who truly understood the landscape of military service and difficult transitions. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Dr. Reeves appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand for morning assessments, but she paused when she noticed the quality of interaction between her patient and the cleaning staff member. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Dr. Reeves said, "but Sergeant Walsh, you seem more engaged than you've been since admission. Is everything all right?" Walsh looked at Maria, then back at the doctor. "Yes, ma'am. Maria here is a veteran too. It helps, talking to someone who's been where I've been." Dr. Reeves studied Maria with new interest, noting details she'd overlooked during their professional interactions over the years. "I wasn't aware we had military veterans on our environmental services staff. What branch did you serve in?" "Air Force," Maria replied, maintaining her cleaning routine while feeling the familiar tension of exposure. "Search and rescue operations." "How wonderful," Dr. Reeves said, her medical training immediately recognizing the therapeutic value of peer support among veterans. "Would you be interested in spending additional time with Sergeant Walsh? I think these conversations could be very beneficial to her recovery." What followed was the beginning of a transformation Maria hadn't anticipated. Word spread among medical staff that the quiet cleaning woman had military experience, and requests began coming for her to spend time with veteran patients struggling with various aspects of recovery and transition. Within a week, Maria found herself engaged in conversations that went far beyond routine maintenance tasks. Her cleaning cart became a signal for veterans that peer support was available, and her daily rounds included time for interactions that reminded her why she'd chosen military service in the first place. Staff Sergeant Walsh was preparing for discharge when she approached Maria with an expression of gratitude mixed with determination. "I want to do something to thank you," she said, "not just for the cleaning, but for helping me understand that my service didn't end when I came home." "You don't need to thank me, Sergeant," Maria replied. "Helping each other is what veterans do." "That's exactly what I mean," Walsh said. "I've been talking to the other veteran patients, and we want to nominate you for the hospital's Excellence in Patient Care Award. It's time people knew that we have a genuine hero working in environmental services." The nomination process that followed brought Maria's military background to the attention of hospital administration, who were amazed to discover that one of their housekeeping staff was a decorated combat veteran with specialized training in emergency medical care. "Maria," said Hospital Administrator Dr. Patricia Williams during a meeting in her office, "we had no idea of your qualifications. If we had known about your military background, you would have treated me differently," Maria finished. "You would have created expectations and responsibilities that might have changed the very simplicity that made this work effective." "But now," Dr. Williams asked, "now that your background is known?" Maria considered the question, recognizing that this moment represented a fundamental transition in her service at the hospital. "Now I have opportunities to serve in new ways while maintaining the same purpose. The cleaning work continues, but maybe I can also provide peer support to veterans who need understanding from someone who's walked similar ground." The agreement that emerged created something unique within the hospital structure. A staff member who maintained her environmental services responsibilities while also serving as an informal veteran peer supporter, with institutional recognition but without bureaucratic oversight that might compromise the organic nature of her work. 6 months later, Maria stood in the same hospital corridor where her identity had been quietly revealed through Morrison's recognition, watching as a new group of veteran patients settled into the ward. Her approach to service had evolved to include visibility when it served others' needs, while maintaining the essential humility that made her effective. Among the new patients was a young Navy medic struggling with survivor guilt from a recent deployment, a situation that reminded Maria of her own journey from invisible service to purposeful recognition. As she approached the new patient's room with her familiar cleaning cart, Maria reflected on the unexpected directions that service could take, the many forms that healing could assume, and her growing understanding that sometimes the greatest courage lay not in remaining hidden or seeking visibility, but in being exactly what others needed when they needed it most. "I'm Maria Santos," she said simply as she entered the room, beginning her cleaning routine. "Environmental services, and also Air Force veteran. If you need someone who understands what you're carrying, I'll be here every morning. And in that introduction, the cycle continued. Service finding new expressions, healing creating new possibilities, and recognition that heroism often worked best when it served others' needs rather than seeking its own acknowledgement.